Am I a dreamy man because I dream too much?
Yes.
In my private room, I found numerous changes of clothes, a king-size bed, a television, speakers, and a laptop. Nice. This looks like a pretty decent setup, actually, I thought to myself as I walked around the room, checking everything out. I leaned and fell backward onto the big, comfortable bed with my arms outstretched, then closed my eyes and wondered about what exactly this drug trial would entail. A short while later, I could hear a ding from a speaker somewhere in my room, which said,
"Dinner is now available. All participants, please meet in the kitchen to receive your food and take it to the dining room. Leave your empty dishes on the table when you're finished eating. They will be taken care of."
Dude, where the hell am I right now? This place is equal parts weird and awesome. I chuckled to myself as I got up and put on the soft slippers provided for me, each of which were red with gold embroidering on them that had my name written in some kind of fancy cursive script. When I walked into the kitchen, I saw a buffet of what looked like all different kinds of high-end, delicious foods. There were actual filet mignon steaks in one of the metal pans. I grabbed the tongs and put one of them on my plate, then scooped up some diced potatoes, and even grabbed a bowl of mixed salad with juicy sliced strawberry halves mixed in. Might as well eat all the healthy stuff too while I'm at it, I thought to myself, smiling as I carried the 5-star meal to the long wooden table in the dining room. The table had red placemats with gold trim, and the silverware was wrapped in a thick red cloth napkin. One of the women was already sitting next to Dennis, and the other woman was sitting on the opposite side of the table, which left either the seat at the head of the table or the seat next to her, so I opted to take the seat next to her. Before diving into the delicious food on my plate, I figured it'd be courteous to at least introduce myself to the two women and greet Dennis. Looking at each of the women and then Dennis, I said, "Hey, nice to meet you both. My name's Mitch. Dennis and I briefly met in the theater earlier, but what are your names?" The woman sitting next to me answered first with, "I'm Allie. Nice to meet you." Her tone was a bit hard, but I couldn't tell if that was just her personality, or if maybe she wasn't happy about being here. Then, the woman across the table sitting next to Dennis said, "Hi, Mitch. Nice to meet you. I'm Samantha," in a much more pleasant and soft tone. "Cool. Nice to meet you, Allie and Samantha. Good to see you again too, Dennis. I guess let's dig into this delicious meal then," I said as I rubbed my hands together and unwrapped the silverware from the cloth napkin. Eyeing my filet mignon steak, I had to try and keep the drool from escaping my mouth. Oh yeah, this is going to be a good 3 weeks if we're getting food like this every day, I thought with delight as I chewed the juicy steak. Hey, where's the other guy? Should one of us go get him and tell him that the food is ready? I asked as I finished chewing a bite of steak.
That's James. He should be here in a minute. I think he just got called over to talk with the doctor for a moment. I'm not sure, but I think he might be more involved with this trial than just being a subject. Seems like he and the doctor already knew each other,"
Dennis said. Interesting. Alright then. Well, I guess we'll see him in a minute. Thanks for sharing, I said, and then immediately shoved another bite of steak into my mouth. A couple minutes later, James did end up walking into the dining room and sat at the head of the table. This time, he was the first one to introduce himself to me, as he stuck out his hand and said, "Hey, I'm James. Nice to meet you." Mitch. Nice to meet you too, James. Say, I was wondering, how did you all end up in this trial? Well, I'm a Navy pilot, actually. I fly an F-23, and while doing test flights and training exercises in the Pacific Ocean, I've encountered numerous UAPs. This trial was suggested to me by my commanding officer, so I accepted and came here. I guess they want someone with first-hand UAP experience participating in the trial, James said matter-of-factly. My eyes were wide with astonishment. I'd interviewed David Fravor before, the pilot from the famous video of the gimbal released by the Pentagon, and that was awesome. But here I am spending 21 days participating in this crazy trial with another pilot who has direct experience with UAPs. Wow, I felt so excited, but also a bit torn up, because I knew that even if I did interview him here, I wouldn't be able to use any of the material. I brushed that thought aside though, and focused on the fact that I'd be going through this trial with him. Before I could say anything, Dennis spoke up across the table and said,
Wow, that's pretty cool. I'm afraid my situation isn't quite as fascinating. I work as a dentist and I own a practice, but I was approached by some representatives of this trial and, well, I was thoroughly convinced to participate.
Dennis's comment about being thoroughly convinced to participate stuck out to me. Seemed a bit odd to phrase it that way. I was about to ask him what he meant by that, but before I could, Dennis turned to Samantha next to him and asked about her. Well, I manage a grocery store and was also asked to participate. They actually came to me while I was at work. They asked for me by name. Then, when I introduced myself, they were really intent on confirming that that I was abducted when I was younger. What about you, Mitch? Samantha quickly changed the subject and turned to me. It was apparent that she was pretty uncomfortable talking about her situation. I was about to respond, but before I could, James had cut me off by asking me,
You wrote that article for MUFON about Foo Fighters, right?
I was pleasantly surprised by this, because I genuinely didn't think anyone here would even know what the Mutual UFO Network was, much less recognize my name from an article I'd written for them. Actually, yeah, that's exactly right. I'm an investigative journalist specifically focused on researching UAPs, extraterrestrials, abductions, etc. You read my article about the Foo Fighters during World War II?
Oh yeah, I did read it and it was great. I'm impressed. Yes, I may be a pilot for the military and have the stigma of being no nonsense, but I've seen some things over the ocean that I can't explain. Some of those things are eerily like the Foo Fighters described over the Atlantic during World War II. You really did your research, and your descriptions hit the nail on the head.
This is awesome! I had mixed feelings about this James guy at first, but I was feeling pretty tall after his comments. Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's good to hear my research paid off. I responded, then quickly turned to face Allie sitting next to me and asked, What about you, Allie? Allie finished chewing a bite of some potatoes, wiped her mouth with the napkin, and then said, I work for the NSA as an anomaly analyst. Specifically, I analyze massive amounts of incoming public data for new UAP appearances and stories of abductions, so I can filter out the fakes and document the real incidents. Similar to James, I was also aware of this trial through my connections, but I requested to participate instead of being asked. With some laughter and wonder at the strangeness and variety of our backgrounds, we finished eating and then headed to our rooms for the rest of the night. Something stood out to me, though, and it bugged me for some reason. Dennis was the only one of us who didn't really mention some sort of connection to UAPs or aliens. And what was that comment he made earlier? Something about being thoroughly convinced to participate? I pondered on these thoughts for a little bit as I lay in bed, but after a long day and with a belly full of such delicious food, I fell asleep quickly. That same speaker that had announced dinner last night chirped and then said,
Good morning, participants. Please proceed to the gym for your morning exercises. Breakfast will be prepared when you are finished.
in that same monotone, robotic-sounding voice. For as fancy as this place is, they didn't really go out of their way to make the voice sound realistic, I thought to myself, chuckling, then got up, got dressed in some workout clothes, and met up with everyone in the gym. The exercises weren't too difficult, thankfully. It was mainly some calisthenics, followed up with 30 minutes of cardio. So I definitely still broke a sweat, but honestly it felt good, and it sparked my appetite for breakfast. After showering, getting dressed, and eating a delicious breakfast of eggs Benedict and bacon with everyone, we all went over to the lab for our first dose of this mysterious new drug. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't at least a little nervous, but again, I was also very curious to see what this drug had in store for us. I stood third in line behind James and Allie, and was followed by Dennis and Samantha. The shot wasn't that bad, actually. I barely felt it. Poor Samantha, though. She looked pale as a ghost when it was her turn. I guess she doesn't like needles, or she's just nervous about the new drug they're giving us. Soon enough, we were all back in the theater where the doctor waited for us. He explained that we'd be watching numerous videos, and we were instructed to record our observations on the laptops we'd been given. At first, it was a bit boring, actually. Most of the videos were repeats of things I had already seen on YouTube, a lot of which I knew for sure were fake, and I made sure to note that down in my observations. Finally, it dawned on me that I didn't feel anything at all from the drug they had given us. I was beginning to think that maybe it didn't work, or maybe I'd been given a placebo. But then the videos switched to new footage from a Navy fighter jet that I had never seen before. Oh, awesome! This must be either classified or never before released footage, I thought excitedly as I straightened up and leaned forward in my seat to watch, rubbing my hands together in anticipation. The footage was unusual, too, because instead of it being from the aircraft's various cameras, this angle was clearly from the rear pilot's GoPro camera, or whatever kind of helmet-mounted camera he was wearing. I could clearly see the entire cockpit and the forward pilot sitting in front of and slightly below the rear pilot. There seemed to be some strange distortions in the footage, though, but I dismissed it as likely being from the G-force on the camera. Suddenly, a bright light could be seen in front of the fighter jet. It was moving left, right, up, down, and all over the place, almost as if it was some kind of pinball being bounced around. The pilots in the jet seemed to be chasing it to keep their cameras on it, but it was too fast. Must be why the pilot's wearing a helmet camera. He can at least turn his head quickly enough to follow it, I thought, feeling quite intrigued. That's when I noticed those weird distortions again. There seemed to be these vibrating distortions around the forward pilot's head and around all of the gauges and controls of the aircraft. I know this probably sounds funny, but it kind of reminded me of the movie The Predator, When it turns on, it suits invisibility, and you can still see the outline of it, but it's like the light is being bent by a lens or something. Only this looked like a bunch of tentacles shooting out in every direction from the pilot's helmet and the controls, like a bunch of heat waves distorting the air. "Whoa, what the hell is that?" I said out loud as I stood up and peered closer at the screen. In the corner of my eye, I noticed the doctor seemed to perk up at this development. And then I heard Dennis say,
You mean the vibrations around his helmet? And, oh, yeah, around the controls too?
"Yeah, exactly. What is that?" I responded, feeling excited that Dennis was also seeing it. I looked over and saw the doctor either making some kind of audio note on his phone or talking quietly to someone. But then my eyes were glued back to the screen again. Is the drug making me see something? Am I hallucinating right now? This is just too weird, I thought to myself. A few moments later, a couple of the assistant doctors came into the room. Then, Dennis and I were instructed to follow them, while James, Samantha, and Allie remained in the theater. Dennis and I both turned to look at each other, feeling apprehensive at first, but then Dennis nodded and we both walked out of the theater with the doctors. We were led into the lab and both instructed to sit down. The doctor walked to stand directly in front of us as the two assistant doctors began taking our blood pressure, drawing several vials of blood, and putting electrodes on us. As he stood there, he clapped his hands together again in excitement, then smiled and told us, "Gentlemen, I think you are who we've been looking for. All of the videos you were shown prior to that final video could be considered as control videos. They were fake." I laughed slightly derisively and also anxiously, saying, "Well, yeah, I could have told you that. But are you telling me the video with the weird-looking distortions was real?" Before the doctor could respond, Dennis quickly chimed in and said,
"Yeah, just what is this? Why didn't James, Allie, and Samantha come with us?"
"Precisely. That final video was indeed the real deal. You two are who we've been looking for, and I'm about to tell you exactly why. You see, this isn't our first trial, and we've had suspicions for a long time about what these UAP sightings really are. That distortion you witnessed in the video is what we think is really behind them. For some reason we aren't aware of yet, certain people are able to see them immediately upon their first dose of the drug, while for others it may take a couple of weeks, and for some it doesn't work at all." Dennis had a stern look on his face when I turned to gauge his reaction. It was almost like he was lost deep in thought, but to be fair, I had a tornado of thoughts in my own mind as well. I'm an investigative journalist, though, and this is exactly the kind of thing I love to research, so I didn't waste any time diving into questions. "So, you think they're aliens? Why were they around the pilot's helmet and controls then? Shouldn't they be in the UAP? Don't hold out on me, Doc. This is right up my alley." "Aliens could be one way of describing them, yes. But we don't believe they come from anywhere out in the universe. They seem to appear and disappear from reality at will, which leads us to believe that they're more likely some kind of interdimensional beings. It's a place so far removed from what we know and are capable of understanding that we've taken to calling it the unknown. As for why they're around the pilot and the controls, well, that's exactly what we want to find out, and you're going to help us do that. We know enough to say that there is a purpose to these sightings. They're driving us toward something, but we don't know what they're driving us toward." Dennis finally spoke up and asked,
Help you how? By watching more of these videos? Why can't you watch them yourself? I think there's a hell of a lot more to this than you're telling us.
He sounded really stressed, almost upset, and I began to wonder what was going on with him. Dennis, please remember what you're doing this for. We're making history here, and not just to be famous. We're doing this for all of humanity, the doctor replied. At this, I responded, Look, I'm not trying to pick any sides here, but he's right, Dennis. At the very least, this is the biggest discovery imaginable. I mean, we're not alone in the universe. What an incredible opportunity to be at the forefront of this. That being said, Dennis also has a good point, and I agree with him. What aren't you telling us? The doctor sighed heavily and waited for a long moment before saying, The tasks you're going to be assigned after the training and testing here involve you observing these beings not just in videos, but in person. We have reason to believe that with proper training, you can gain more insight into them by seeing them in person and interacting with them. Oh man, this sounds like such an amazing opportunity. I'm feeling ecstatic and excited inside, and I'm daydreaming about these future tasks. When I hear Dennis ask,
Do we have a choice?
The doctor looked grimly at both of us, but then focused back on Dennis, making eye contact with him, and said, I'm afraid not. It's all in the non-disclosure agreements and contracts you all signed. With that, the doctor quickly turned and walked out of the lab as the assistant doctors removed the blood pressure cuff and electrodes. As the woman finished taking off the last electrode stuck to my forehead, she told us, You've finished your training and lab work for the day. Please take some time to yourselves, and then you'll meet the others when you hear the speaker announcing lunch. Dennis and I walked out of the lab together, and noticing his silence and all of the subtle things I've observed about him thus far, I couldn't help it. I had to know. So I asked him, Hey man, what's going on with you? First, you said you were compelled to participate in this drug trial. You didn't mention any involvement with UAPs and aliens, and you clearly seemed a bit hostile back there with the doctor. Is there something I should know? Without meeting my eyes as we continued walking through the room with the huge vaulted ceilings and chandelier, he responded with,
I don't have any involvement with anything related to this, and I didn't sign up for this trial. But my family, my brother and sister, well, they are involved. I always thought it was crazy, but I loved them and I supported them anyway. My brother can make some of those balls of light appear at will, and he claims to be able to communicate with them. I've seen him do it, actually. He asked it to bounce around from point to point, making out the shape of a sailboat, and it did. Gave me the creeps, honestly. My sister, I don't really know how to explain it. Some people might call it remote viewing, but either way, she meditates and somehow she knows anywhere around the world when and where a sighting is gonna happen.
Dennis finally looked over at me and met my gaze before continuing with,
If you're not getting the picture of why I'm here yet from all of that, then put simply, I'm supposed to be the silent observer while they're the bait. They want me to use them to contact these beings, to find out when and where these sightings will happen, and to communicate with them, all while I'm in the background secretly observing these beings.
I stared at Dennis for a long moment, trying to process what he had just told me. Wow, dude, that's intense. Well, we're in this together, so at least you're not alone. Besides, it doesn't seem like there's much danger in doing this. I mean, it's not like that pilot was being attacked or something. It was all I could think to say at that moment to try and encourage him, but Dennis's response caught me by surprise.
And how do you know that thing wasn't attacking the pilot? Countries attack each other all the time with cyber attacks, economic sanctions, manipulation, and psychological campaigns. Why are you so sure that's not an attack?
I was speechless. Dennis was right. I've always been so fascinated by aliens that I didn't really stop to consider the reason why the aliens are here in the first place. You're right. I don't know. Its intentions could be malicious or benign. There's not really any way to tell without observing them and interacting with them in person, though. It took a moment, but finally, Dennis responded by saying,
Yeah, I guess so, but it's pretty messed up that my brother and sister have to be the bait to attract these aliens that we know nothing about.
I simply replied, Yeah, I agree. That's pretty messed up. Seriously, what the hell am I getting myself into? I thought to myself as Dennis and I split up and went to our private rooms. The next 21 days ended up flying by pretty quickly. The routine was a bit repetitive, but I was starting to get in pretty good shape with all the exercise, and I'd be lying if I said it wasn't cool to watch tons of classified military videos of those strange beings. What Dennis had said to me never left my mind, though, and I spent a lot of time wondering about trying to figure out why they're here and what they want with us. We did end up making a potential breakthrough toward the end of the 21 days. However, it wasn't anything about why those beings are here or what they want from us. During several of the videos, I noticed that playing them in slow motion revealed a connection between the way the tentacles moved and the way the UAP moved. It was so strange. It looked like the tentacle beings were using the pilot's mind and the aircraft's controls to maneuver the UAP. During the final week before we were allowed to go home, we were shown some videos which finally shed some more light onto Dennis's apprehension about the tasks being asked of him. In one video, a young man could be seen laughing and looking at his friend recording him, then pointing at the night sky and saying, "I told you! I told you!" When the camera panned up, a bright white orb with a purple hue around its edges could be seen hovering. But when the young man who had been laughing suddenly said, "Show my friend! Move in a circle 3 times above us! Can you do that for me?" The orb did exactly as requested. While this video was pretty amazing and demonstrated intelligence for it to be able to communicate and understand the request, whenever the camera was looking at the laughing young man, a massive distortion of tentacles could be seen vibrating from deep within his head. The friend who was recording turned the camera around to face himself and say, "This is crazy! Jeff wasn't kidding! He can really make them appear and talk with them!" And as he did, we got the closest look at one of the beings yet. It was also more massive than the ones we'd seen in previous videos, and given such a close angle, I caught a glimpse into what looked like some kind of tear in space. I remember wondering if that might have been its entry point into our universe, but that's where the video had ended. The craziest part, however, was when we were informed that those 2 young men from the video have been missing since then. The video was never circulated online because the phone which had been recording the incident was eventually recovered at that location by investigators searching for them, and it was never released to the public. I admit, if I was in the same position as Dennis, I'd probably feel the same way about my younger siblings being used as bait for some aliens we know nothing about. Scratch that. We do know that they are doing something with our minds, and we do know that there are real missing persons cases related to incidents with these beings. So it's not exactly looking completely safe. When it was all said and done, and we were allowed to go back to our own homes, I had no idea when to expect my first task from the doctors. I expected to hear something right away, honestly, but I ended up having enough time to move into a new place and get a new car, which I was quite happy about. About 2 weeks after moving into my new place, however, I finally received my first task. I was cooking some breakfast when suddenly I heard my phone chime with a new text message. So I walked over to grab it, entered my passcode, and read, "Mitch, you are required to complete your first task. You must attend a small gathering at Crater Lake in Oregon 3 days from now at 7:30 in the evening for the Aurora Borealis show. Dennis and his brother will meet you there. We believe the electromagnetic fluctuations from the aurora will enhance your ability to see and interact with the beings of the unknown. While his brother calls the UAPs and attempts to communicate with them, we need you and Dennis to observe and attempt to make contact with the beings. We'll send further instructions. Check your email for them and for the plane tickets." I swallowed dryly as I set my phone down to finish cooking. Oh shit, here we go, I thought to myself, both in excitement and nervousness. After I finished eating and checking the tickets, I rushed to get packed and catch my flight so I could scope out the place before the gathering was scheduled to occur. I flew to Oregon, got a rental car, and drove to go check into my room at the Crater Lake Lodge. With the sun disappearing below the horizon, I had just enough twilight to walk around and take a look at the beautiful lake with its impossibly blue water, and look at the Witch's Caldera on Wizard Island. Wow, this place is incredible, I thought to myself as I admired the natural beauty of the oasis on top of a volcano. Too bad this isn't a vacation, but I can't complain. At least I'm getting to check it out. That night, I got some rest, but the following day and night, I explored all around the rim and took note of where everything was scheduled to take place. Finally, on the day of the gathering, I met up with Dennis and his brother to prepare for the evening. Dennis's brother was so excited to check out the aurora and share his experience with the beings, which made Dennis and I share a knowing glance with each other. After a day of hiking, taking pictures, and eating a big lunch, we were finally on Wizard Island, with more and more people showing up as the green and red lights of the aurora began slithering slowly across the sky. It was my first time seeing it, and it was fascinating to see. I kept watching them, and I could hear the ambient, amazed murmuring of others also watching the brilliant display. Suddenly, I heard Dennis's brother say,
"They're here! Look, do you see it?"
as he pointed animatedly in the sky. But I couldn't see what he was talking about. I searched frantically all around the sky, but I couldn't see anything except the aurora. So finally I pulled out my phone and started recording the sky. "Whoa! Yeah, I see it now!" I said excitedly, while also hiding my nervousness. What the hell? Why can't I see the orb with my eyes? But it's showing up on my camera? Is this supposed to happen? I thought to myself as I tried to figure out why I couldn't see the orb with my own eyes. Then, while moving my phone around to capture the orb's movement, I finally saw a vibrating distortion around the phone in my hand, and I gasped in surprise. Staying composed and pretending as if I couldn't see it was more difficult than I expected. It was one thing to see them in the videos, but seeing them right in front of me on my hand and vibrating through my phone? Well, there's nothing that can prepare you for that. I swallowed dryly and I turned slowly to look at Dennis's brother. I couldn't help but gasp when I saw the massive vibrating tentacle being latched onto the back of his head, with tentacles reaching out towards me. Suddenly, as if the being had heard me gasp, the tentacles going into Dennis's brother's head stopped vibrating, and the entire being came out and slowly floated through the air toward me. I felt in shock, and I couldn't take a breath at all as it stopped right in front of my face. It floated there, mere inches away from my face. Then, it slowly started to vibrate again and began to blur everything around me. As the vibration continued to increase in frequency, I noticed a vertical tear starting to open up in front of me, similar to what I had seen in the video. Where the opening of the tear was, all I could see was an intense darkness, like all surrounding light was being sucked into it, as I would imagine a black hole consumes light en masse. I was transfixed by this incredible and frightening sight before me, when a strange voice in my head suddenly said, "You aren't like the others. You're aware of my presence. Come, let me show you." As the voice trailed off, I felt myself being pulled inexorably into the tear. I literally could do nothing. I couldn't even scream or resist or anything until within a fraction of a second I had moved entirely through the tear. Well, it seemed like a fraction of a second anyway, but I can't know for sure, because as I was pulled in, I noticed that time and space stopped behaving as I've always known them to. It was simultaneously like time was standing still and moving forward faster than my mind could comprehend. There was no light or sound in this place. I only knew what I was experiencing about time and space because of the way I felt it. In fact, this place seemed to be strictly a place of feeling only. And I don't mean the sense of touch. I mean that internal feeling you have sometimes when you just intuitively feel like something will happen. That feeling of deja vu, or the feeling of someone watching you or being nearby even though you can't see them. At least that's the best way I can think to describe it. But it was more than just that. I just don't have the words to explain it. All around me, I could feel these tentacle beings, and I knew that this place, outside of time and space, outside of all things that are knowable, was their home. They didn't speak to me, yet somehow they were still communicating with me. For lack of a better term, they were showing me, from the beginning when man had first been created to the present day. Despite not being able to see, hear, smell, taste, or touch anything as they took me on this journey through history, I was beginning to understand a strange revelation. In the beginning, everything was brand new to mankind, and we weren't concerned with the inner workings of the universe. We were fascinated and filled with wonder at the beauty and magnificence of creation around us, and this place of the unknown felt massive, while the tentacle beings roamed around freely and happily, not interacting with our world at all. Then, one day, I could suddenly feel a constriction or a tightening of this dimension of the unknown, and the tentacle being's feeling of alarm was palpable. They reached for the source of the constriction and peered into our world for the first time. At first, they just watched, but did not have any interactions with us. However, as mankind was becoming very curious, and we were intent on learning both the how and the why behind things in the universe, this would change. The more laws of the universe that we continued to discover and make known, the more this place of the unknown began to shrink and caused more alarm to these tentacle beings. Finally, they had their first interaction with humanity by reaching into our minds and causing us to see unknown lights moving impossibly through the sky. These interactions were a huge success at first. They caused mankind's sense of wonder to grow again and reduced our sense of how much we felt we knew about the universe around us, which loosened some of the constriction on the unknown. Periodically, the tentacle beings would make these interactions happen to keep the balance. That balance was severely disrupted with the advent of technology and its exponential growth, though. The tentacle beings were becoming crammed and outright panicked. Would they die if mankind learned all that there is to know about the universe? If they didn't die, where would they go? Their ocean of the unknown would be dried up, and they would be like fish out of water. This caused them to exponentially ramp up the sightings, and they even interacted with the circuits in our technology to make these UAPs visible in videos and pictures, further solidifying our sense of wonder and increasing our feelings that we don't know nearly as much as we thought. Technology has not slowed in its growth, however, so these beings have resorted to taking people who go out into forests, canyons, mountains, and other places where they become missing persons. We don't know where these people went, and the emotions attached to this lack of knowing where they are has a huge effect on expanding these beings' home of the unknown. I was struck by an overwhelming sense that these beings were communicating to me that we need to find some kind of a balance between diving into knowledge and technology and leaving some things about the universe unknown and just appreciating it for the beauty that creation and the laws of physics truly are. As this revelation grew in intensity like a cyclone spinning around me, so did my overwhelming emotions until I finally faded into black. I groggily opened one eye as I fumbled around, reaching for my cell phone to read the text message of the notification that had just woken me up. Then, my memories of those beings suddenly came back in a flash, and I jumped out of bed, breathing heavily. I reached up and ran fingers through my hair, and I wondered, was it all just a dream? Hi, fellow dreamers. Thanks for listening and joining the Dreamy Man on his journey through this dream. Please do him a favor by liking and subscribing with that little notification bell so you'll be notified every time he falls asleep and starts dreaming again. See you next time, and may all of your dreams come true.